So we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Just for information's sake, this meeting is a regularly called meeting. The notice, the time and place, and agenda of the meeting have been provided to the local news media, each member of the governing body, and has been posted on the city webpage and on the state public meeting webpage. Go ahead and do roll call. Councilman Labram?
Here.
Councilman White?
Here.
Councilman Baird?
Here.
Councilman Waite?
Here.
And sounds like Joe may be here a little later, but he's
Not sure whether he'll make it.
detained in Salt Lake, so
He had an appointment in Salt Lake, and he wasn't sure whether he'd make it back.
we'll excuse him tonight. To get started, I'll go ahead and offer a prayer, and then if you'll follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Our dear Heavenly Father, we come before Thee this night. We're grateful for the opportunity to be here as Roosevelt City Council and staff and members of the public. We pray at this time that Thy Spirit will be with us to guide us and direct us in the decisions that we will make tonight and the discussions that we will have. We're grateful, Heavenly Father, for all those that serve in our community, for the staff and all that they do for us and the citizens. We ask a blessing upon them of safety and protection, and to guide and direct them in their efforts as well, that the community we live in may be blessed. We're grateful for all that we have. We're grateful for the area that we live in. At this time, we ask Thee a blessing of moisture and for our area and for those that need it. And Father, we're grateful for all that we have. We love Thee, and this we say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. As part of our meeting, well, first of all, let's go to the minutes. Each of you should have a copy of last meeting's minutes. It came to our attention that there was an error. If you'll look in your meetings or your minutes, it states that the American Legion was who was there, and it was actually the Veterans Memorial Committee. And so there has been somebody has asked that we make a change to those minutes and amend those minutes, and wondering if we could get a motion to amend the minutes to change the American Legion to Veterans Memorial Committee.
I'd make that motion, Mayor.
Okay. Motion by Councilman Labram,
I'll second it.
second by Councilman White. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion passes. This week's minutes, are there any amendments or corrections to page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Not, I entertain a motion to approve.
So move, Mayor.
Motion by Aaron Waite,
I'll second that.
second by Councilman Baird. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion passes. As part of our meetings, we have a public comment period. Hal? You're the only one here, so.
Keep up the good work.
All right. Thanks. Great. We have no public hearings. Last meeting, we talked about the Western Hills Motel and the situation that we have there, and entertaining ideas on incentives or how to help blighted areas in our community, and wanted to further some of that discussion. Ryan, do you want to?
I can talk a little bit about it. Just kind of show a map here. Some of the detail One of the ideas we talked about was possibly working with the county to take out and abate old buildings, things that are vacant or blighted or something like that. And so you can see here the commercial zone. If we did something in the commercial zones, you would see that fits right along our highway. And that's really where we want residential. That's where a lot of the growth will come. And so if we were looking by zone, this would be one of those. We just kind of show it that way. We've talked to the county a little bit about the discrepancy between costs of hauling material away from into Duchesne County versus Uintah County. And there is a difference because Uintah County charges by the load. And so if you haul it there, it doesn't matter the weight, it matters the volume. But in Duchesne County's landfill, it matters weight. And so a heavier, building, something that's heavy, costs more than plastic bags. So, at that point, volume will fill a landfill faster than weight will. But at this point, that's how the pricing is done in Duchesne County. So there's a discrepancy on this one. With a building like the Western Hills, a motel, something like that, there's probably a $10,000 difference in just landfill fees because of the weight and the volume and the pricing differences that they have between the two landfills. So if we had an ability, one of the items we had talked about was possibly getting them to see a building like that the same as they do the trailers. So they have a program that takes old trailers and they accept those into the landfill at no cost.
Well, actually, it's a low cost.
Is it low cost?
It's a low cost, but I think it's more of a per trailer cost instead of a weight cost, and it is significantly less than. And they said they could kind of apply that and figure out how many trailers it was, and then calculate that.
They knew they had a lot, and then I thought at one point they had an incentive that they had a drawing for if you had trailers full or something. But anyway, kind of getting that ability, maybe an incentive. But the question really comes is, what do we want to incentivize that can be fair across the board, doesn't harm those that are already there. So if you tear down an old building next to something that's current and new, it doesn't harm a current building, a current business. It actually helps them. And but anyway, that's one thought. Other thoughts have been taxing or financing, something to do along that way. Being able to create a zone that would allow us to, as we increase property values, it would take that investment, that increase, and put it aside in a fund to be able to help us with other things. So anyway, lots of different opportunities. It's just really what the council's appetite is. And the other one we've talked about is being able to develop alleyways. You know, we have, at this point in time, our alleyway system is unmaintained. We don't maintain alleyways. Throughout the system, at this point, we've been lucky to maintain our roads. We're doing better there. We've made good progress in the last couple of years. But up to this point, we've never taken on maintaining alleyways. And so any alleyways that are done, most of them have been either paved or improved by the adjacent property owners, if they wanted to. But this would give us an opportunity. Maybe we put that in. John and I and some of the other staff have talked about putting that into the budget, maybe adding some into the budget as we get to there, to be able to work on chip seal or development of our alleyways a little bit more, at least in our commercial areas. We wouldn't be able to extend that out very far. We just don't have the resources to maintain them very far off of our, maybe one block off of Highway 40. But that comes to a lot of people, we've talked, that alleyway access has been an important one. As we saw TC Ice Cream, the one that came before, they wanted to utilize the alleyway for theirs. The property, there next to China Star, the hotel there, they would want to use the alleyway. Taco Bell has wanted to use the alleyway. It's a popular one for us. So.
The good thing about the alleyway is thinking about it, you know, if those are an accident, you know, I know the ice cream shop, they use that for an alternate way to get back around versus coming right back on the highway. And so you limit your points at where traffic is trying to get back on the highway, and then you divert it to, you know, stop signs or other areas where, you know, I think safety-wise, it's a good thing to look at too, Mr. Safety. That's right.
Yeah, I think if we bladed it, we could bring in some rotomill and you know, we don't have a lot, but we could bring in some rotomill or road base, and maybe even chip seal with our project if we get some funds from the CIB board to do more chip seal work that we've applied for, maybe taking some of that and incorporating that into chip seal work. Because if we could do it, the problem with alleyways is they're inherently poor drainage at this point. So we don't want to pave them and put in the cost of that. That would cost to pave it without major drainage improvement, but a chip seal wouldn't have that necessarily as big a problem. If it didn't work out, it's not nearly the expense that a new base would be. So anyway, that's kind of where our thoughts are on alleyways and working that. But anyway, those are kind of things, a couple of the thoughts. I know that maybe the rest of you have some thoughts, and we're willing to investigate some of those or look into it. And then if there's amounts that we want to start setting aside, maybe we do something there. I don't know. But, so anyway.
One of the things, so I found an economic development plan from back in 1999, and it had some incentives in there, and one of them referred to what you had mentioned, Darren, or Councilman Waite, and that was the TIF, tax increment financing. And so I met with Brad Hancock today for lunch, just talking to him about this and how that worked, and just to kind of give, you guys may already be aware, but I wasn't, a lot of those, we have quite a few areas in our city that this has already been implemented in, and one of those is Stewart's. He mentioned Stewart's, he mentioned the Twin Theaters, he mentioned where Family Dollar is, or the Dollar Tree, where the bowling alley used to be is, and a few others, where they were able to implement this type of a program and get some of the blighted areas. I know he mentioned where the bowling alley was. It used to be an old hotel.
Yep, Standard Motel.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
And
so,
the Polar King was part of that. That was right
yeah.
there.
And they were able to use those funds to kind of clean that up and make it appealing for businesses to come and build on. And so I think that's something that can apply to everyone and already has been benefiting local people in our area. So that's something that we could definitely implement. And that he did mention with that, you have to have a redevelopment agency. And we've already talked about an economic development committee, and that could function as a redevelopment agency. And then we have to get permission, and it has to pass through the county. So it's funds that would flow through the county to us through that redevelopment agency, and they would have to sign off on that. So it is a possibility, and those are some of the things that you know, I think are good ideas. Just throwing some of those things out there, but it has been done, so that's a good thing.
So, go a few minutes, Mayor.
Oh, sure.
I appreciate the work that you've done. Appreciate the work the city manager's done. I guess I asked the council in my mind. I'm just looking. My perspective is, I guess what first do we want to drive? You know, what's our goal? And then 2, what's the best way to administer the goal? And 3, how do we make it most equitable for everybody? I'm a huge fan of trying to get some of these blighted buildings, just things that aren't developed in our city, to an area where they can be developed and made into something that we hope will generate revenue and, you know, parents, economy, commerce, all those things. So I guess I'm asking, what's the best method? I think both have good use, but also want to be sensitive to existing business. But in the same breath, want to find a way to make it happen, you know, to the point where do we put it together for a period of time? Say we had a tax increment financing, do we select, this is just hypothetical, but what's the zone we have that's on Highway 40, what's it called?
Commercial
zone.
Commercial zone. Commercial zone, and we say it's for a 5-year period of time, or a 3-year period of time, or whatever it is. We have that ability, I guess, to put the time block on it. Try to drive some of those commerces that people are saying, hey, this is an incentive for me to invest in Roosevelt City now. It's a good time. You know, that's one approach. Is the county coming back to us with their approach on the thought process of the demolition? Are they going to come back with it?
I think we'll need to go back and visit with them, but they were very positive. I think we're on a good track to be able to proceed there.
Yeah.
So we just need to get back with them and communicate back and forth.
Commissioner Winterton was the most outspoken in that, and it sounded like he really wanted to make something happen. So I think, you know, he kind of threw that out on the table, and I think we ought to not wait until the next meeting, but actually maybe pursue that sooner and just say, hey, what can you do? Because, you know, the sooner the better on that one.
So as a council, do we have the ability just to simply make the choice? You know, as a council, we're going to be supportive, or maybe even we subsidize to a certain point the tearing down of old buildings to encourage that process. That's maybe a high impact for us. And I don't see that business deems that as a negative anymore, because that comes down and it improves the process. That's just a thought that I would have too. And we worked really hard as a council a few years ago to take care of this building by the Frontier Grill. It sat there for, gosh, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And we had to flex a little bit to get it done, but we got it done, and it's been great that it's down. And I would imagine in time, somebody's gonna wanna grab that piece of property.
Yeah, I've heard that somebody already
have somebody
made,
interested.
so.
That's perfect.
And that's a perfect example. One of the things that Brad mentioned, he said, you know, if we could identify as a council and as, you know, as staff, the number one area that we want to focus on, and focus on that one. So if we can narrow it down to the number one opportunity and the number one area that we would want to focus on, and focus on that first and work on that, so that we're not trying to do the whole thing, but just the one that's probably most beneficial to the city as a whole. And you're right, I think that, you know, any business, as we improve our surroundings and improve, you know, the way our main street looks and everything else, is just going to benefit them. Even if, you know, and it's not really like somebody's getting something for nothing. A lot of, or getting something up more than what somebody else would get, because a lot of people that build, they build on vacant land, and so they don't have to deal with some of the issues where there are already buildings that maybe need to be torn down, and so nobody wants to touch those at that
Excuse
time.
me, it's just addressing back when they did the ones you brought up. I think that you have to really define areas and make geographical boundaries when you make that redevelopment, and I think that's really good to make the focus, and if we can help in certain areas. But I think where we're focusing on who's brought up information is probably the most reasonable spot that's going to be a point. It'd be nice to do it on Main Street more, but I know we looked at those things once before, and of course everybody, the value of what they think their property is, it's really a hard transition, tearing your building down and building a new one without compensation. Good. But I think this is great. It'd be wonderful to get some points cleaned.
The hard thing with Main Street too is when you tear into one.
I mean, it'd have to be a block at a time.
Yeah, you'd have to really it'd be a major project, and so those are all things to be considered, I think, and part of the reason we kind of need that agency and that board to look at those things and really focus on those and bring back good, solid information. Hal?
What's our magnet?
Well, that's a good question.
I would like to see something that, not only a Burger King or a Taco Bell or whatever, or a Chevron, but something unique that causes people to come to town
Mhm.
and maybe spend an extra half hour or a half day or a whole day, but something that will attract people and not only slow them down, but stop them
Mhm.
and let them spend the night, spend a couple of meals, or a couple of, spend enough time to eat some meals here, so, you know, we need, I think Ryan and I talked about that from here some time back about a magnet, but it, you know, we
Yeah.
don't have any dinosaurs here, except me.
Well,
But we do have a few magnets.
We do.
As we look at it, you know, we have a wonderful golf course that attracts a lot of people, in one of the few one of the few true island greens in the state. I think we're one of only 3 or 4. So it's a magnet. We have one of the last drive-in movie theaters in town. That's a pretty good little magnet. Does it bring a lot? No. But we also have the hospital that's a huge magnet. And from a hospital perspective, I think they would say, and some of the things they've said is that a third of theirs comes from outside of the area. If we look at what we're importing, our leakage analysis, healthcare is one we're attracting in tremendously. We have a wonderful college, both college and university, that do attract in. We have some of those magnets, as he was talking about. I agree. The question comes is how we magnify some of those magnets to magnify our economy, because we haven't built our main streets, we haven't built our infrastructure necessarily around where those magnets are. There's not a place to put residential or a commercial next to the college. There's really not some of that there. There's not a lot of commercial next to the hospital.
Well, think of it this way too. We have all those magnets, and we have a lot of good things to draw people to our area. How well is that advertised? And that's one of the things I've noticed as I was looking at the economic development, and I pulled it up online. You can go to most any other city, especially those that are fairly substantial cities, and they have online. They have this online for everybody to see, businesses that were looking to go into that area and everything else. So how do we advertise that? How do we make that information available? You know, just a thought, and I hope I'm not speaking, saying some things that I shouldn't, but I know an individual, I know the son of the president went hunting over in Vernal, up above Vernal, just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. We have Falcon's Ledge, we have some of the greatest fisheries around. How are we advertising those? I mean, we have some really good things going for us. You know, it's how we advertise, and that's part of the overall plan, I believe.
One of the biggest things when we've tried to get those things for Roosevelt more as a hub is housing, motels and rooms. That's probably one of the biggest things that hurts us.
Yeah.
And but you know, there was one going to be built down here by Stewart's or in that area
Where the
constantly,
Burger
and
King
they
is.
just kept holding off and
Yes.
holding off, and then withdrew. And you know, that it's the thing that makes the heartbeat go out here and makes things grow is the gas and oil. I mean, that's what really generates money and people moving in, having good jobs type of things, and instead of moving out for other jobs. And so, but to get private industry to invest a few $1 million in a motel has been a hard thing in our area. Even though they did them a couple, to the east of us, getting them in the Roosevelt area has been a little harder.
Look at this area just for me. I would say a zone that I think is most important is from the city boundary on the east side to State Street on Highway 40. I think that capitalizes on some of the magnets that we have. One of the magnets that we're getting now is a brand new high school that has capability now of doing things as far as bringing recreation to Roosevelt City that hasn't been there in the past.
Hosting, yeah.
I think that's something that, it's a natural flow to the north to try to develop that and target that. In my mind, I would propose we look really, really hard at getting that. If I knew the parameters to make the motion to propose it tonight, I'd do it. But I don't know what the parameters are, because I think, in my mind, the parameters would be that we would have some type of an incentive to take old buildings down. And for me, personally, I would love us to see to work with the county, see what the county will do, but then set a threshold that we'll contribute, participate in, so that we can truly put some skin in the game. So we mean this. We want you to come. We want you to help clean up this part of town or revitalize it, however you want to term it. There are a lot of possibilities. We've had some good things come through there. I know that McDonald's has invested heavily in the past few years there. Wouldn't be a bit surprised to see them invest a little more now that they have competition coming to town. Taco Bell's came to town there. There are some positive things that have happened there. We have a great grocery store on that end of town. We have a good car wash there. We've got Catholic church there. We've got some good business, but boy, just a little bit more to clean up some of those gaps, I think go a long way. So I asked the question, how do we term it so we can get it done and move on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things before maybe a motion's made to think about is a lot of the things we talk about, and I think Hal kind of hit a chord there, and that is, we have a lot of everything that we've talked about the food places, and a lot of those, they don't generate wealth. It takes an industry and something that does generate wealth to make those go round, which is the oil and gas. One of the things that I would really like to look at is looking at areas also, not only looking at commercial, but also areas of industry or
Manufacturing type something.
Yeah, that we could incentivize to come, but also have the vision that I have is if we have infrastructure in place, if we have everything ready for them, they will come, because it's easy for them. As a business owner, it's a huge incentive for somebody to come in and have all of that ready to go, and they can put up shop and start making money almost immediately, even in these other areas, whether it's restaurant or whatever. Those are some of the things that we really need to look at, I think, as a city. And how do we proactively tear down a building or put in infrastructure and then make sure that we're not losing that? We won't, because the sales tax and the other forms of revenue that come, but also we could work it out to where that's built into the cost of the land. I would pay a little higher price for the land if it was ready to go than if I had to come in and do that, and so those are some of the things I think we need to look at as well. The more ready we can be, shovel ready, and I hate to use that term, but that we can be when people come, I think that's a huge incentive to get them here, especially if they're looking at Green River or they're looking at Price or somewhere else. We're ready. That's a huge incentive. And then if we have a few things like this in place, it's a...
At what point do you bring the Chamber of Commerce and say, hey, let's put your thinking hats on?
Yeah, see, and that's part of the thing. This redevelopment board, an agency or economic development committee, whatever you want to call it, they're a part of that. Planning and zoning is a part of that. Capital projects is a part of that. And then we have a few outside thinkers that are a part of that. So we don't have to discuss in a meeting like this all the options, but those can be pursued by a committee that would search those out. So
I think getting started.
Yeah.
Another option,
Another
something
whole
else
parking
that
lot was
might consider
China,
the council
because they paved.
is oftentimes it's trying to find the right business that fits us. And I've talked to a company that what they do is they have software. They sell it to both the developer and the cities. And so what they do is they say, okay, you can go through and you can identify who you are and what your parameters are, and it will spit out who is your best fit. Is our best fit a Target, a retail of this, a Chili's, an Applebee's, who's our best target? Obviously, and I don't know whether it fits into manufacturing, but if it does, who fits our base? We feed in our data, feed in our information, and then it tells us, okay, here is your best fits. And not only here is your best fits, but here are the contacts for those companies to be able to contact. The other thing it does is, for those that are looking to expand, it lists us into that spot and says, hey, here is Roosevelt, and they have this, this, and this. And as they pull up, okay, where's our ideal place to go? They can say, oh, Roosevelt shows up as one of our ideal spots. They just called us and said, hey, maybe we're interested. Something even along that line. Previously, we've looked at it. Price came back at about $50,000 for the software, and so it's fairly expensive to be able to do. But as we look into options, if you're attracting the right one, you look. I take a prime example and say Aaron's. Aaron's came into our market thinking that they could have the same kind of thing that Vernal has, and in the end, our market was not the same. So them expanding into the Roosevelt market, we were into buying furniture by the month. Apparently, I see that they didn't last long, but they're still in Vernal. They're still operating. They still have a business model, but their business model didn't fit our culture apparently because they didn't last that long. And I wonder if we find some others that maybe they do fit as we attract them. Maybe that's another thing we consider is how do we find them, and what are we willing to invest into finding the right ones that maybe fit us. Maybe we don't do that. We are a very independent group here in our group. We don't have a lot of chains, and maybe that's what we love. I don't know. But anyway, that's another thought to consider.
I was going to say that I like that idea, but I think before we invested in something like that, it'd be a good idea to find out if there's other towns like us kind of in similar situations that's invested in that and it's actually worked or failed,
Sure.
See how that's worked out.
The other thing I was thinking too is, in my mind, we are who we are now, but that's not who we have to be in a year. That's not who we have to be in 2 years. In other words, we look at what people are looking for in an area to be able to expand, and we start to meet those needs as well. So we have to try to identify what makes a manufacturing company want to come to an area. Is it people? Is it the workers, trained, skilled workers in that area? Is it, it's the location? Is it access to railroads? Those types of things, highways, freeways, whatever that is. What's that? Airports. We identify those, what their key pieces to the puzzle is, and then we start to look at how we can best fit that. Obviously, we're limited in some areas, but whatever we can do, we should do, in my mind. So,
I think, Mayor, you're onto something good there. I look at them almost as two little buckets, because our Main Street revitalization is going to be a little bit different than our economic development outside, where we are going to be more of a manufacturing, call it manufacturing, commercial, whatever we want to call it, but an area where we want to bring in more of a business that's setting up a different type of business than Main Street. I think we need to work on both fronts to get them done. I was in a meeting last week with a very interested developer out of Logan that has great interest in coming to the Uinta Basin. And this is a company that does things that if I won't share because I shouldn't disclose. They do things internationally. Big things, if I shared, you'd go, wow, that came out of Logan, Utah, that's the type of stuff that they do. No idea how big their market share is, but it's massive. But have a desire to have a presence in the Uinta Basin. But that company's a type of fellow they need a different type of space than Main Street space for sure. But I think we can do both of those.
Yeah.
I think we really can, and I think we need to work on both fronts there. Getting to the Main Street, is there a way we can move forward on a Main Street to help some of these things along, or is that not the case right now?
I would say,
Or even prepared?
I would say maybe a little underprepared in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. But what we could do, I think, is as we're looking at Main Street, try to have our staff with our input set some parameters as far as what we look at and what we'd entertain and consider as something that we'd participate in.
Let me reach out to some of the other city managers and kind of reach out to some of them to get some of the parameters. One, I want to understand, what the appetite is of the council. And before I go one direction or another, I want to know the appetite of what the directions you want me to go, so I can go there rather than shooting out shotgun and get anything. The more we can hone in, and it sounds like we've got
One of my
so.
appetites, you just watch the growth as I've watched through my life. It's on the freeways. And that's really been a negative thing for us because transportation and because of strawberry out there, that kind of was a real thing in getting the big jail that Gunnison got. I mean, the transportation, some of those. So we need to really look at cities that aren't on freeways or, that close to them. Just look at rural Utah. What's happening? The Uinta Basin's only kicking like it is because we have gas and oil. And we do have the recreation that you talked about. So those are things that we really have to do. And we have the great assets that have been mentioned, the hospital and the education. And that took a lot of years of people doing little things, but trying to emphasize. So to keep our vision within what we could do, but I think if we're going to really look, we need to look at some, maybe if there are some that have been stronger. I've tried to watch that in my own industry. It's been really hard for any dealerships to stay still vibrant, not being close to freeway areas. The ma and pa, the smaller dealerships just keep eroding away unless they have real quick access to bigger populations and things. So I just think we need to look at that instead of ones that we can't match up with. Like you said, narrow the look. You were saying that. That's my feelings too.
I think my appetite is along that line, and then also just to boil it down on a surgical appetite for the city, my appetite is provide some type of an incentive to remove old infrastructure. That's what my appetite is right now.
Well, we can do, that's things we really could do as a city, like you said, and then it makes it more inviting when they come to look.
Yeah.
Somehow we really need to get a motel or two within our city boundaries. That would just really,
What's that?
but
No.
we need people to come and use them. Or if they were using them, they'd come.
I think
We have to have a draw.
I don't know how long the push will last for the governor and the jobs incentives that they've been to try to get rural Utah to capitalize on some of the growth that's happening in the Salt Lake area and the more populated areas. But I hope that if we can get these incentives or get some of these places ready, that we never know what might come our way from that.
Right.
That we get diverted out to different places just because there's so much of a flood going into Salt Lake and Provo and that kind of an area.
One of the areas we really have an opportunity to capitalize on in the Uinta Basin is with strata. I don't know if everyone knows, but there's 2 places in the state of Utah that have the highest wireless speeds. One of them's in Provo, it's the Google network, and the second one is here, in Uinta Basin Stratus network. We really do have an opportunity to be the backside of what they call the Silicon Slopes. And that's an area of infrastructure that doesn't require a freeway. It doesn't
Right.
require any of those things, and I can truly see those things coming in time and coming quicker. So that's an area I think to keep in mind as we look to develop those type of spaces, and those can be Main Street spaces.
And that's true, and they don't take the fiber optics, I mean, the fiber lines is what really did that. And
Yeah.
Spreada had good vision in our school district, connected with all of our schools back with them, that really helped at our educational things. That's great observation.
Well, in the list that I gave out a little while ago of kind of people that would participate in the committee, Strata was one of those, and that was part of that reason. And I think, another good reason to have that committee formed is everywhere I go, and as I look, the governor's office has an Office of Economic Development. The county, and other cities, all of them do, and they all coordinate and they all work together. And it's just something that I think it's needed here, so that we have a group of individuals that are constantly looking at those things. We don't have time. I know Ryan, he has 50 million things to do too. But if we had a committee, that was their task. And they work with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. They work with the county. Strata's part of that. And several other businesses or co-ops in our area that would provide infrastructure and those types of things. Planning and zoning. We bring all those together. We can really coordinate our efforts and really start to get the ball moving.
What is Mike McKee, the chairman?
Doesn't
that involve our county? I
Coalition.
mean, it is economic and things.
And I've talked to him several
Great,
times.
great.
We're both members of the Central Utah, and he's all for this. Getting
Yeah.
a committee, and when we do, and we're organized, people will start to reach out to us in that regard. The more organized we can become, and this is formed, the more we're going to get looked at for those types of things and recognized.
It has been one of the hardest things when I was a young buck in business and trying to get a chamber of commerce active in our city and doing things. It's always been hard because most everyone had few employees, and you couldn't be to meetings and miss work. You had to be to work to cover. It's a constant thing. We need this young vision and the thoughts and promotion. So
If we brought Irene into the loop on, she technically is the Economic Development Director
For the whole
Cushing
county,
right now, to see what is going on and how we can better support her. I'll be really interested to see her thoughts and vision, because she has an amazing pulse
Yeah.
on.
let's get her on our agenda to come in and present to us and have a.
We should, and I've visited with her, and I've ran these ideas by her also, and in hopes and anticipation that she'll have the support she needs. One of the things I think, I'm speaking, and this is just what maybe my perception of what she feels. She's out there, she's cheerleading for us like crazy.
Yes.
But if we're not ready, when she finally gets somebody that would like to invest in our area, and we're not ready, that's not only a bad thing for her, but it gives us gives people a bad taste in their mouth. And I know that's kind of happened with not intentionally, but unintentionally happened with a few things, in our area, and that's hard. I can see that as being hard for her to want to stay motivated to try. Again, when we organize ourselves and we get all those pieces of the puzzle working and everything's working together, and she's involved with that, that's a critical piece to that redevelopment board or committee, is to be constant communication with her, and her bringing us that information and us going out and looking at where we can put these things and put infrastructure and how we can accommodate businesses coming in. That way, when they do come, that communication's already been, given down to all the different entities to where it's ready to go. All the problems are solved. Everything's, when we do that now, it's an investment of time, but hopefully that investment will pay off.
Well, I think that investment's happening right now with the vision of wanting to be unit and working together with the efforts with Johnson Water. To me is extremely important in this, and that's one of those things you're talking about. Get it all together, and so people know where to go and what to do, and
Right.
we know how to handle it. So
Just a few other questions, just to clarify my mind, because you and I visited a couple months ago, and I like the Economic Development Committee thought process. And I said before, I think almost utilities and economic development are almost two different things.
well, they are.
Preparing properties for shovel-ready has to come at a price. Who invests in that? Developers always invest in it now. Utility companies don't invest on the hope that they come.
Mhm.
Just because that's just not the model that they have. They invest on the back of the developer. So I guess with that in mind, I would want us to make sure we're focusing on something we have really an opportunity to influence and provide a lot of leadership on, knowing that there are some of these other parameters out here that are outside of our circle of influence or control, more of outside of our control. We can influence, but as far as dropping the dollar, that's going to have to become really it's somebody saying, you know what, this makes sense to me, I'm willing to invest in it, I'm going to put this $1 million to work. You know, either because I have somebody coming or I'm willing to take that risk. So I guess my thought would be, what is your thought on that with economic development, and what are you envisioning in your mind?
That's a couple of good questions. One of the things of getting the utilities involved. So with that economic development committee, I see that there's different sections of that. So, you know, Irene Hansen and the Chamber of Commerce could be a subcommittee. And then you have, you know, some of the utilities as a subcommittee. You have, anyway, so that you're not, you know, it doesn't take, how am I trying to portray this? You have different functions within that committee that people play a part in. And where the utilities come in is they come in and say, well, it would cost, or we have this available. This is what we have available for water if it's Ryan, or you know, this is kind of the anticipated cost if you were to do that, just to give us real-time information so that we can kind of put information together. Not to ask them to invest necessarily. I think, and which leads to the second question, I think the one that would invest would have to be either we have all these things lined up and ready to go and everybody's on board that if a developer came in and wanted to invest, it makes it very simple for him to, and all the process is kind of taken care of. So he knows how much it's going to cost him. You know, they have $1 and how quickly it can be done and everything else. So that information is valuable. But if we, as a city, wanted to make an investment in infrastructure and say, okay, we're gonna bite off on that, you know, we're gonna, that's an area that we really want to see development go into. So we're gonna do what it takes to get it up to speed to make it enticing for somebody. Then at the point in time, if there's a way, and these are just thoughts, so I don't know if we can do this, and it'd be good to see what other cities do, but if there's a way to recoup some of those costs that we invested in the exchange of the property, so when somebody purchases that, there's a price tag tied to that associated with what the city's investment was that they could recoup. It could be a long-term investment, but, you know, and even Brad said it today when I was talking to him. Well, and he mentioned a few of the streets that were improved and that the city took the incentive and invested in. And they're some of the better parts of town right now. And some of the highest paying property tax areas and those types of things. And so there's definitely some things that need to be weighed out there. But if the city doesn't take the initiative on some of that, I don't know who will. And how do we do that and make sure that we're recouping our costs, but also incentivizing businesses to come and ready for it.
Mayor, as far as recouping costs, some can come through impact fees if we
There
have
you go.
different areas. Similar to really the West Cove area, to even put that in. I think having an impact fee will help offset some of that, but if we had other areas of infrastructure we put in, Fifth East would have been a prime one to expand quite a bit of area there, and I don't know if that's what he talked about. But at that point, looking out and doing that and being ready, is an important one, and be able to invest into something that way. If we wanted to have a recoup, we could have put on impact fees to associate with that.
Right.
We also be able to identify, and I think some, as far as infrastructure goes, some of that should come through our master plan, and as we get into our master planning and public involvement, outside of a committee, this could be public involvement, because it'd be one-time kind of involvement to formulate and do that. And I think, as far as our CIB, we've talked about, that could be something we apply for in the fall and come at and try to get more planning on that side. So
well, one quick way is that the master plan was on a 1-year plan, wasn't it? Yeah, and so if we can get this committee going and to already start the process of gathering information, by the time that master plan comes around, if it is funded, we really have some good information to go on to add what we're discussing to our master plan, no overall vision and scope of what we're trying to do. Sorry, you had a comment, and
Yeah.
I think we probably ought to, I know Grant's here, and he gets paid way more than all of us, so we ought to kind of get moving unless we have more discussion, but
when I was running for office here, I talked with a developer who talked about some of his concerns about developing in our city, and one of them was that some of the costs are unknown, and I think an economic development committee putting some of the utility companies in there on that is a good idea. He mentioned something that I actually do for a living for oil field development. I work with oil field companies. We go out to the site prior to them doing any construction at all, and we talk about the things that we're going to require for them to do as they develop, so that they kind of understand what they're getting into if they go on to do this. And I think with an economic development committee, they could do something similar to like an on-site, take everyone out there and discuss the plan and see what kind of things they can do to maybe help out the developer or incentivize him if there's any way for them to do that, or even just shoot around ideas together. That way the developer prior to developing can kind of have an idea. Anyways, just a thought, but I know he had specifically mentioned that oil field companies that get out there on site before any development and they go through everything, and he thought that would just be awesome if there was any way to do that, so that they can kind of minimize the risks on their part. They know what they're getting into. He mentioned some, putting in fire hydrants and things like that could potentially be something that they weren't expecting that could cost them quite a bit of money. And so,
one thing the staff does when something like that comes in from the staff side, we have our public works, our building inspector and I, and water if we need it. We pull some of that in as they come to the city and say, hey, what's this area? And we'll say, okay, let's get together. Here's a few things, and we'll meet with them from the staff side. So, but that doesn't include electric or some of the other utilities.
Gas.
Some of those, gas.
Electric.
It doesn't include some of those. That just is what we do as a city. We'll meet with them that
a lot of people, even like you said, the company that you were looking at, more the data end, or that end of things. There may be speeds involved that they need. I know Strata can get certain speeds in certain areas they can't. And so being even to identify some of those and have those answers to those questions just immediate and quick and efficient really is going to help people when they're trying to make that decision. And it won't be a large investment in time for the people involved, because everyone will take their little part and bring it to their piece and bring it to the meeting. But it will be so valuable in my mind for somebody looking. I know when I was building my building, there were a lot of unknowns, and it's not as easy as you think. And if you had somebody there supporting you and helping you and helping you understand all of that right off the bat. That's a huge, huge incentive. And I know Dan Karen mentioned that in one of the meetings, when we were actually campaigning in one of the meetings that night anyway. And so it's always on those people that are investing in things. They want to immediately see where they're going to get what their costs are going to be and what their anticipated returns are going to be. And so they're always calculating those things out. So anyway, is there any other discussion on that? I think, Ryan, you feel more comfortable with maybe putting a few things together before we...
I can work on some things, and I appreciate that. So, yep. We'll work on that, and then if...
Thanks, Mayor, for pushing these things. I mean, it's really great. We've seen the working together in the streets back in the day when we finally had meetings with Strata and the gas company and water, all of them. Before we did streets, we started coordinating meetings, and those things, they bring in their expertise. We can avoid a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So it's great.
That's a function that I didn't even think of, but that would be a huge asset.
Oh, yeah.
We generally do that every 6 months.
But we weren't doing it a while back, and it made a big difference.
Talk about what our plan is for the year as we put that together. We'll bring them in. So that is something we've continued to do.
That's great.
Grant, we'll give you the time.
Okay,
Thanks for being here, by the way, first.
No
of all.
problem.
Appreciate it and appreciate you.
and I'm glad to come anytime and talk about whatever you want. If you just want to let me know if there's things that you're needing. And on that same note, it doesn't have to be in meetings necessarily either if anybody has questions. I do get calls periodically. I think everybody fairly well except for Councilman Baird. So I guess probably formally introduce myself. I'm Grant Charles, City Attorney. And if you don't already have it, I'll make sure that you have information so you can contact me directly if you need to. But I was asked to come in and do a presentation, talk about a few different things that actually may each be subject matter for its own training. We're covering a lot of things, so it's going to be somewhat general. But if you want to get into things more specifically than what I'm doing, just stop me and we can talk about whatever you want tonight. And then if there's something that I need to come back for, I'm more than happy to do it. But what I'm planning to talk about are kind of give a brief history of the forms of government, just because for some of the other things I'm going to get into, we're going to need a little bit of background information. And then talk about responsibilities of the mayor, council, the recorder, the treasurer, the city attorney, and the police chief. And then also talk about some common pitfalls, talk a little bit about the Open Meetings Act and liability. And that's all I've got planned tonight for the open meeting. But then also wanted to do a legal update on some pending litigation and reasonably imminent litigation that we'll have to do in a closed session, but I think it'll be fairly quick. Okay, so just for a brief history, going all the way back to territorial times, there has been this combined legislative and executive function that has been really just termed as governing by committee. And that carried on from tradition from very early on, really when people were first getting here needing some form of local government, up until 1959 when the state legislature first provided statutory options. And you may have heard of the strong mayor form of government, the Strong Mayor Act. That originated in 1959 and created some statutory separations between the executive and legislative powers, which was a change from what had been going on with the governing by committee. And that continued on until 1975 when the legislature repealed the Strong Mayor Act and enacted some additional forms of municipal government, which were actually very similar. But we got council, mayor form, which basically mimicked the federal form of government, where there was a single person in the executive position and then a council, or sometimes they called them commission early on, for the legislative functions. But at the same time, they created the council manager form, which it really functions similar to what Roosevelt has today. But when it was designed, rather than mimicking the federal government model, it was mimicking private businesses, essentially. But there was still a pretty strong distinction between the executive and legislative functions. And just a few years later, in 1997, the state legislature rewrote Utah's municipal code, and the form of government at that time was determined by class. And are you guys familiar with classes of cities based on population? Okay, so it starts, first is 100,000, goes down to 65,000. Second is 65 to 30. Third goes from 30 to 10. I might be off on the
Yeah,
numbers.
you're right.
I didn't look at these, but
10.
and
It's close.
fourth,
It's close.
yeah, fourth is. No, I am off on it because
Yeah, you are
we're
off.
fifth, and we're between
5th is 0 to
10
10, I believe.
and then towns are below that. But so in 1997 or 1977, the form of government was determined by the class of the city. But that's when they began to allow 5 and 6 member councils. And also in 1997 is when they first statutorily created provisions for a city manager position to be created by ordinance. And as part of that, the state code started allowing the mayor's administrative and executive powers to be transferred somewhere else. It could be to the city manager, it could also be to a councilman. And as part of that, when they start to allow for the mayor's administrative and executive powers to be transferred somewhere else, they also gave the mayor the power to vote on the hiring and firing of a city manager. And then that continued on till 2008. We're almost through with the history here, but they repealed the optional forms of municipal government, rewrote it, continued on with the 5 and 6 member council provisions, and essentially left us with, they say 3 options, but there actually is a 4th. It's just in a different location. But so the options now are the 5 member council, the 6 member council, and the council mayor. There is the option of a charter, but only one city has done that, and that's Tooele. Okay, now with these different forms of government, it's really hard looking at the state code to pin down your responsibilities in the state code. And the reason is they've kind of been created as a starting point. But then the council has the ability to transfer powers, like I was just mentioning, with the mayor, and to have someone else exercise those. And as a result, no 2 municipal forms of government in Utah are quite the same. And that was done intentionally, though, because the thought process is that local government knows the needs of the area best, and we're best governed by local officials. And so it's both a hard thing to deal with and a good thing in the end at the same time, because it gives you some flexibility that if the rules were just enacted and rigid statewide, you wouldn't have. But it does leave you in a position where knowing responsibilities can be difficult because they're not just spelled out in the state code. Okay, now Roosevelt is acting as a 6-member council, and just because I haven't had a reason to, I haven't actually gone back and looked at the document that started that, but if you ever needed to, we could. So we've got the 6-member council with the city manager, and ordinances in place for the division and assignment of executive and administrative powers on the city manager. Okay, so getting more into responsibilities, and starting with the mayor position. In Utah, it's generally not a full-time position. That's not to say there aren't any that aren't, and I should rephrase that, because it is a full-time position in the sense that it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But as far as being able to perform just that job and not having to work at a different job, it's unusual in Utah for the mayor to be like a full-time job. The mayor in this form votes only in limited circumstances. One is to break a tie, and there has to be a majority, there has to be a quorum present, and the mayor can't count as a vote to get
Make the quorum.
Yeah, but if there's a tie when there's a quorum present, then the mayor has a vote. As I already said, he has a vote to hire or fire city manager, and ordinances that add to or diminish the statutory power. And this one,
Tie vote.
what's that?
And a tie vote. Or you may have already said that tie vote is one.
Tiebreaker is what I said, but yeah, that's what I meant, is a tie vote. Now, on the ordinances that add to or diminish the statutory power, that's talking about what you see in state code is the mayor's responsibility before any of that is delegated to someone else. In Roosevelt, there is a lot of power and authority delegated to the city manager, and that, I assume, was done in 1993, trying to make things run more efficiently where the mayor was not a full-time position. But the reason that it works both ways is a new council or a new mayor can't come in and have the council upset and dump everything back on the mayor, except under certain circumstances. And so to take the mayor's power away and give it to somebody else, or to take it from somebody else and give it back to the mayor, one of two things has to happen. It can be done by a unanimous council vote, and that's not counting the mayor, or it can be done by a majority of the council vote with the mayor's consent. All right, does anybody have any questions on that? It's fairly straightforward. Okay, there are certain functions, a lot of them are, I think, are accurately classified as ceremonial, but there are certain things that can't be taken away from or delegated by the mayor, but somebody else can fill in for him if he's unavailable. Chairing these meetings is one. It just says legislative and judicial powers in the code, but it's example like marrying people the mayor can do. That's not something that it delegates to Ryan. It's probably not the only one you don't want. Okay, now for council members, basically your role is to have the legislative powers, or another way to phrase that is that you have policy-making powers. Individually, the only thing that you have as a matter of right is the right to cast your vote. But collectively, you have the power to set policy for the city. And that is subject to open meetings rules, which we'll talk about here in a minute. If there is an open meeting violation, your decision can be set aside as the remedy to that. Okay, I already said you can be delegated administrative powers that otherwise would have been the mayor's. Okay, the city manager position is the next one that I want to talk about, unless anybody has any questions about the mayor or the council positions. Okay, now the city manager is one that is a little bit easier to go somewhere and see exactly what the responsibility is. And it's done by ordinance, so it's in our local code. And it's in 2.04. Specifies that the office of the city manager is created in the beginning, but if you keep going down through, it talks about powers and duties. Has everybody had a chance to read this yet, or do you want to go through it tonight?
I've read it, I don't know.
We've all read it.
Okay. Okay, so just as long as you know where to find it. Now, the city manager position serves at the pleasure of the governing body. When you're going through codes for municipalities, there will be times that it uses the term governing body. That's talking about all of you, including the mayor. There are also times that it'll say legislative body. When it says that, the distinction between those two terms is governing body includes the mayor, legislative body is talking just about the council. So the city manager serves at the will and pleasure of the governing body, so the mayor has a vote in that. But there is another, a caveat here, and that's that the provisions of the city manager's contract come into play. So you have the ability to do what you want with the position, but the city manager is still entitled to all of the provisions of the contract. Okay, now the recorder is the next appointed position. The recorder's responsibilities, and I'm intentionally simplifying this, and Carolyn, you can speak up if I'm oversimplifying it. But the recorder's responsibilities can really be separated into two different categories. One is record keeping, and the other one I would say is really probably accurately described as an auditor, but there is a financial side to the recorder's responsibilities. And for the financial side, I think the easiest way to envision what the recorder is over is accounts payable. And the treasurer that we'll talk about in a minute, I would kind of label as the accounts receivable.
The treasurer's accounts receivable, right?
Yes.
And the recorder's accounts payable.
Right. Okay. Now, that gives the recorder a lot that they need to do, and in a city our size, they probably need some help. And so the code allows for the creation of a finance director position, but it also says that the finance director may not also be the treasurer, which is something that we're going to need to talk about here in a minute. The recorder can't serve in the recorder position and a few other positions at the same time. One is the treasurer, and the reason why the finance director can't also be the treasurer is they're being delegated recorder responsibilities as the finance director, and so the same rule applies to them as to the recorder, saying you can't do both. The recorder also can't be the mayor or a justice court judge. Okay, now, as I already said, the treasurer you can look at as accounts receivable, and really probably also cash on hand, unless you can think of another way to label that, Ryan. But the money that we already have and the money that is coming in is the treasurer's responsibility. And the treasurer, as vice versa with the recorder, the treasurer can't serve as the recorder and also can't be the mayor or the justice court judge. And this isn't something that I'm asking you to make a decision on, and it's not on the agenda, so you wouldn't be able to. But just to point out, we do have a little bit of an issue with this, if you weren't already aware of it, and that's that our current treasurer is the finance director, and that can't continue. So it's something that we need to fix. I've gone.
We have an ordinance drafted to fix that. So
Oh, you do? Okay, good. I had met with Ryan.
Involved with that.
We just haven't presented here for the council. We haven't added it. because we've just barely drafted it before, and had it reviewed by a publishing group.
Okay.
And review those codes before they bring it.
Okay, and is it recommending that the city manager be appointed treasurer?
It doesn't list that as that.
Okay. Okay, my recommendation, without creating a new position, is that right now I think we can fix this problem by appointing Ryan as the treasurer. It gets rid of the conflict laid out in state code to not have the treasurer's responsibilities falling under the recorder's office, but that's something that's up to you guys.
I have a question about that, if you don't mind. So it said, when I took the state auditor training, it said that neither the treasurer or the recorder could be supervised by each other. And it seems that the recorder's directly under Ryan on the line of authority or whatever. So I'm just curious, how does that conflict, or does it not conflict, or is there a way to get around that with putting him as the treasurer?
Well, that's a good catch. I mean, the code does say that, and no.
That same recommendation came from the state auditor to match the same, he's mentioned, state auditor's office, the deputy, Walker.
Jeremy.
Yeah. So he made the same recommendation that, lots of cities will appoint their city manager as the treasurer as well. One of the things.
The mayor appoints and the council gives their consent, right? Is that how that works with the treasurer's position?
Yeah.
The other thing is if you're aware, Vernal, their city manager is also their recorder. So they have that same title over there. Vernal does, that's how they've addressed that. And so their city manager recorder, that's the title, and then they have a finance director.
And maybe there's some other creative way to make it so that you can be the treasurer and have, the recorder under you. But I'm just curious. That's why I asked the question. Is there some way to
And I was just going back and
mitigate that?
looking at the city ordinances, seeing if there's a way that we could justify it under what the city manager's responsibilities are.
While you're looking, Randy, who do you fall under?
John.
Okay. And Vicky?
So that, and you're basically do the treasurer's job, accounts receivable and cash handling and things like that. Yeah.
And who's doing the recorder's position as far as the payable? Is that you, John?
The accounts payable?
Oh yeah.
That would be Vicky.
Vicky, but she's underneath you as well. So they're both of them kind of fall underneath you.
So if appointed treasurer,
I
that
think
would
Carolyn needs to start writing checks.
That would put Randy under, as accounts receivable under those duties. So it would split his responsibilities as receivables would flow through mine as the treasurer, if that's where it went. It would follow the treasurer hat.
Do you guys have any other ideas on how you would want to assign it? There's not one that's a perfect fit, looking at the way that we have things right now. I think it would be an improvement from where we are, but it's not necessarily perfect.
Well, the question I would have is, so you have the differences so you have the treasurer, which you've been appointed the treasurer, John, is that correct?
That's correct.
And we have a recorder, even though Carolyn doesn't maybe perform that duty right now, why wouldn't we just make her kind of a head of that department and then have one of them work under her? Wouldn't that be as simple as a fix? And then you don't have a...
Now that, you mean having John?
No, I'm meaning Vicky or
One of
Randy
them
working underneath.
Because At this point, the recorder doesn't hold that anymore, because you've created a finance director. So at this
I
point, now the
didn't.
what's that? The council did. The council as a whole did.
But the
By-
finance director
by-
and the recorder isn't necessarily
What's that?
the finance director and the recorder aren't the same.
Yeah, the finance director is created out of the recorder duty. Yeah, that's what pulls it out.
Right.
But that's interesting that we would create the finance director out of the recorder duty and give him the treasurer, and appoint him as the treasurer as well.
I think it was just a mistake, you know.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, the finance director is, I mean, he can still be the finance director as just, so when you created the position of finance director, it's underneath the recorder?
Not necessarily for reporting, but for the statutory authority to be the finance director is coming through the
It
recorder.
is taken from the recorder and put into a finance. I think that's what it'll say, is that you can take the finance, and it was done, how long ago was the finance director?
Before my time,
So over 30,
5.
over
But
35 years ago, the finance
Jolie
director
was acting as the treasurer.
Well, she had
Is
a
that
title of
accurate?
treasurer, but not necessarily some of the duties of treasurer. So she had some of the title, but at that point, the finance director came, under the code, it has it under the recorder, the finance side comes under the, finance director side comes under.
Is that what we created, or is that state statute?
Well, the state statute has it
Allows
allows
for
to
it.
create a
Okay.
finance director
That's,
out of that. And so, at that point, once you've created the finance, you've taken the finance side of the recorder side, put it as the finance director. So you have a
Mhm.
recorder over the records, and then a finance director over the finances of the accounts payable side.
mhm.
I thought the treasurer was accounts payable and accounts receivable, and the recorder was a bookkeeper. Am I wrong on that? I guess,
The
because I know you
treasurer
had
is
said
accounts
earlier
receivable
that
side.
it was accounts. But anyway, I
Say
just,
it again, how you said
I
it.
thought the bookkeeper was the recorder by state law, and the treasurer was assigned both accounts payable and accounts receivable. Okay, I'm wrong about that.
But
It's been a few
bookkeeper-
weeks since I-
bookkeeper, correct, and that's what left the recorder and went to the finance director to create the finance director, and then the accounts payable is under that. So you're correct, bookkeeper would have been a recorder, moved to finance director when that was created. And then at some point in time, inherent in how things evolved, before we started that evolution, to have the finance director doing treasurer items and finance director items, although separate in duties as far as separation of power, separation of duties that way. That was kept intact, but at some point, some of the treasurer duties became onto the finance director, and that was before we came. So when we came and we had a review of done by Mike Swallow and reviewed, he does a lot of the ones throughout the state. But on his review, his recommendation was, you know what, a lot of this supervision is being done by your finance director. You ought to assign him as the treasurer. That's probably the advice he was highly recommended by 90% of all cities we surveyed. He's the expert in his field for salary studies, and that probably wasn't the expert to pick to assign that. But at that point, a lot of those duties are done somewhat there.
Yeah.
The separation of those we've had reviewed by the state auditor's office. They've indicated that they, as best we know, are comfortable with where we're at, and so from their side, they're saying it's not a separation, but simply a hat, a hat, that the wrong person's wearing the hat.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking at, and I appreciate the discussion and a little bit of the history, but really understanding the basics, I think we've got it where everything should fall. And do you work under John then, currently?
Yes.
Then why couldn't we appoint Randy as the treasurer and him work under you? You know what I'm saying? And then you have basically the same thing, but I think, does that make sense? Do we have people that are?
Only would be that there are some, the idea would be appointing the highest level of supervision to that. And I think that's probably what the thought is the highest level of supervision, so that some of the items that the treasurer would be assigned to do, probably Randy's not doing some of those. And if you had at the highest level of supervision, then all of those items would be under that.
Could he do them though? Are you able? That's what I'm saying. Well, and I guess the reason is, and it's no. I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but the way I look at it is when we have a separation and distinction of roles and things, we have the adequate and proper checks and balances in place. When we give one person a lot of hats, we kind of consolidate all of that into one area. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's with government, that's the most efficient way to do it. But government is not always most efficient, and they trade transparency and the checks and balances for, those types of things, and that it looks and is perceived a little different, I think. But that's why I asked the question, not to say that you couldn't. It's just if somebody else could hold that position or have that hat or title, and it looks and is perceived as that we have the proper checks and balances, and we haven't consolidated all those things into one, then I think that's just my own 2 cents, and that's probably all I'll say about that. But that's just my own thoughts. So
Sounds to me kind of like almost 2 things in play, 3 things. We've got the law, we've got an organizational chart, and then we've got a title. So I look at it, because organizational charts, we deal with this a lot in education, because accrediting bodies need certain titles to go with certain things. And people have certain titles, but that's not necessarily exactly the encompassing of the position. So I guess for me personally, I'm comfortable if the state auditor's office is comfortable with what we do, I'm comfortable with it. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are gonna call into question anything that happens. So if the state auditor's office says, hey, we're comfortable with this, I'm comfortable with it.
I don't disagree with that point, except we don't answer only to the state auditor's office. We answer to the public, and right or wrong, whether it's legal or not. They're the ones that I think that as long as we're doing it legally, the state and we keep the state auditor's office off our back. That's important, but we also need to make sure that the public feel comfortable with what we're doing. And ultimately, that was the only reason I made that comment. Not to disagree or anything. But
I'm not disagreeing with that. I guess I've never ever had anyone ask me about any interesting financial things in the city, I guess. So from my perspective, it's like.
So because you don't find any of the financial things interesting?
Obviously, you've not been in John's office very often.
I think the only thing that we would worry about this is if something ever happened that was inappropriate and they went back and said, well, you had the wrong people doing these things, that's where it would matter. As long as everything was done right and there were no problems, this would never be an issue. And so for whatever protection that gives those that wear those hats, it probably ought to be as close to the right way as we can get it. And we may be there. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Good thoughts. I don't know that we're.
The ordinance would simply strike, when we review Title II, we added just finance director and a bracket, or a treasurer and with a bracket, the finance director. We'd remove that. And at that point, I think that's one of the few changes in Title II that would need to happen that way. That would take it so that the code could allow for another appointment.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, just so you understand what the issue is, and that's something we need to address here relatively quick. Okay, that's all I've got on the treasurer. The next one on the list
Are you
is...
sure you can't find something else?
The next one's the attorney. The attorney position, you guys have a lot of discretion to decide how you want to use the attorney and when. And there's also a couple different kinds of attorney. I try to, rather than tell you what you can or can't do, just advise you the best way, I think, to do what you want to do. But there are a few times that I think that it's in your own best interest to be getting the attorney involved, or at least making sure that they're up to speed on certain issues. The first one is when you're served with a lawsuit, which should be the most obvious. When you're being sued, I would advise you to get the attorney involved. Employee issues, and especially if it's firing someone, there are a lot of nuances to the law that I would advise you to seek input from the city attorney before acting. Borrowing money, and this is usually with bonds, and it's usually not me to do it, there's usually bond counsel, and then as part of the process, they require me to sign a letter for them saying that I've reviewed what they're doing too, but most of the legwork is done by the bond counsel in those situations. Buying, selling, or trading property is one, and again, it's just because of all the nuances that I think it's probably something that I have to look at. And then taking away licenses or permits, this can be like business licenses, those kind of things. The law says that people have a property interest in those, and so they have to be afforded due process if they're being taken away. And so it's another place that I think it's in your own best interest for you to have me look at them, but it's not required that you have me look at anything. I'm here to help you, not to try to tell you what to do. All right.
So I got a quick question. So as an individual member of the council, can we come to you directly just to work with, maybe our idea as far as maybe drafting an ordinance to present to the council?
Yeah.
Or is that something that's kind of out? I don't want to. And is that in line? Is that okay with Ryan's contract and things like that? Is it legal for me to do
I'm
that?
not in between him.
Okay.
He's not an employee.
Oh, he's
So
okay.
at that point, he's a contract with you as a council.
Okay.
He's not an employee.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And the city attorney's responsibility is different than any other position, because this entity of Roosevelt City is my client. It's not any individual. And that's probably something that's important for you to realize too, is that if you come to me with questions, I'm not anybody's individual attorney. More often than not, your interests are going to be aligned with my clients, which is the city's. But as far as coming to me directly, yes, you can come to me directly. I'm happy to help you if it's drafting things, answering questions about just what the law is, whatever I can do to help is fine. And as long as it's something that is in the city's best interest, it's something that it's appropriate for me to be helping out on. The only time that you would probably have me saying, no, I can't do that, is if I felt like your interest in the cities weren't aligned, and then I'd tell you I can't, and just reiterate the reason why.
And then you have to hire your own attorney.
Okay. Yeah.
Great question. No.
I do have a question about that, because, well, I guess it's more of your accessibility or when we can call you. I don't want to call you and run up the city's bill, I guess is what I'm saying. So how does that
You
work?
don't need to worry about that. Yeah,
You don't have to worry about that.
I can bug you anytime and it's not going to cost me any different.
no.
I'll try not to do that. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, when Stephen and I entered into a contract with the city, it was at a flat rate, and to try to avoid that kind of thing. And if you have questions, I would rather you come to me than worry about what it's going to cost you.
Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't.
That's a great thing to know too, that I don't think we all knew.
Okay. Any other questions on the attorney position? Okay, the police chief is the last one for positions that I wanted to go over. His responsibilities are to suppress riots, generally to try to prevent crime, to enforce laws, specifically state code and the city ordinances. He would have the responsibility to do court security if Roosevelt had a justice court. We don't. We have a district court that takes the cases of Roosevelt City, which, as far as I know, it's the last remaining court that is a remnant of the old circuit court system. There used to be judges that traveled around in the circuit court, and they were replaced by the district courts. Most cities just elected to create their own justice court. Because of the situation here, that's not the case. And so far, there has been an interpretation of the law that the state can't force the city to create a justice court. It comes up every now and then when the administrative office of the courts is going over their budgets and looking at places that there may be courts that they don't have to provide. Eventually, I think it's something that will come to a head, and they're going to try to force us to shut it down, and there would be probably litigation to decide which interpretation is right. But for now, it's a district court here. And the differences are with the district court, the judge, the staff are all state employees, not city employees. With the justice court, they would be city employees. And then the calculation on what happens with fine payments and those things is different for a justice court and a district court. And Ryan probably knows more about this than me, but my understanding on the reason why the city has not wanted to do a justice court is where we rent space to the court. We like that it's just a set amount. We're happy with what the amount is and don't want the fluctuation and any risk that would be associated with a justice court, and also don't necessarily want to be taking on the extra employees. Does that sound right?
That sounds like my understanding. It was that way when I got here, and I inherited that method, and if it's not broken, don't fix it. So proceeded on in the same manner, and understanding is what is given to you that way.
And the circuit courts and the justice court only do certain types of cases. And what we typically see in the court here is misdemeanor cases. The county prosecutes felonies, and the state courts only have to have one district court in each county to take care of those. And right now, all of the felony cases get done through shame.
Talking about courts, one that you, with the attorney, we do have one other attorney, and that does public defender side, the indigent defense. And that's a contract, and they do it, independent. So Grant would act as a prosecutor, but we have another attorney. We don't see them a great deal. They're
See them every other Tuesday, but not
You do.
this part of the building. Yeah, but there is a statutory requirement that the city has to provide counsel for people who can't afford it. And has it been 2 years ago that we actually entered into a contract? There had been just kind of a set hourly rate and a rotation of attorneys. There were some benefits to the city to consolidate that into a contract, which I think was 2 years ago, but maybe.
could be.
It was recently, I remember.
Yeah, it was fairly recently, yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Who is that one we're in contract with? You know,
Morrison and Morrison is the name of the firm. It's usually
it's not a local one then?
No, they're from the Salt Lake area.
Okay.
Their office has moved around recently, and I think that it's in Murray right now, but yeah, somewhere out in the Wasatch Front. And they're the same firm that does the primary public defender contract for the county. We have two. There's the primary public defender and then an alternate public defender, but the Morrison's firm is the primary provider and has been for at least 5 years
For the county?
for the county. Yeah. And we owe to bid didn't get a great response. In fact, was there just two?
I think there was just two for the public defender.
Yeah, and the Morsons were significantly less expensive. And so even though it was a local attorney who had,
And they have a
Didn't
flat
have a
fee as well, which is
right,
budget. It was that way. And it fit to what we've about been paying on an hourly basis. And then they covered the first conflict, right?
right.
So anyway, if there's because they have multiple attorneys, they can cover a conflict of interest. The first one, they can go to the second.
Yeah, and what that means is when there's co-defendants in a case, that basically, if there's only two people involved, then that firm has kind of paper walls and are able to assign different attorneys and cover both of those. If there's three or more, then we still sometimes have to get help from somewhere else. But on misdemeanor cases, that's pretty rare.
I had a question, if you don't mind, about the police chief. You touched on him a little bit, and I'm just curious. Maybe I ought to come to you individually and talk about this, but I'm just curious as far as we appoint the police chief, and in state law it says that the police chief shall be supervised, controlled, and everything by the body that appoints or individual that appoints him. And I'm just curious, is there ways to delegate that? Because the city manager works under us, does that mean that he is still supervised, controlled by the governing body? Or
Well, this falls into that area that I was talking about earlier, where what it says in state law is a starting point on those things,
Okay.
and then you guys have a lot of authority and discretion to reassign it and delegate it however you want. What's happened with Roosevelt is that normally that would have fallen directly under the mayor, and then that responsibility by the city manager ordinance, that it got transferred over to him.
okay, and
By
that's
contract.
legit.
Not
That's
by ordinance.
Ordinance.
Not by,
It was by ordinance?
yes.
yeah, and I know the ordinance says, as far as it is in line with state law or whatever like that. So that's basically my question is, and I have nothing, against it. I just want to make sure that we're in line with state law. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I know other cities have the city manager over the police chief, and that looks like it must be kosher, but I'm just wondering what the justification and all that is for that. Just is that?
That's the way it works, though, is that those things are a starting point, and then you guys are able to kind of divvy it up how you want. The way that it has worked out here is that it was transferred, I think, by the original ordinance in 1993, if I remember right, is when it was transferred. It's been that way ever since. All of those things, though, are not necessarily carved in stone. When I was saying earlier that those original responsibilities that by statute are the mayor's, for those to change, it has to either be a unanimous vote of the council or a majority of the council and the mayor.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on anything we've gone over so far? How are we doing on time?
Great.
Okay.
So far, so good.
It's been really enlightening on a lot of things.
Okay, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is definitely a subject that, well, not just it can be a topic for its own training, and it's actually required to be a topic for its own training, and it's the open meetings. We have done it this year.
We have done it.
Okay, then maybe I don't really need to spend a whole lot of time on this one where you've already had a training. The one thing that I would like to say about it is with open meetings, and I think that there's been a conscious effort by the council for a couple of years at least now to do this, is to try to do what the spirit of the law is pushing for, rather than just by going by the letter of law, and to have things as transparent as you possibly can. And even though sometimes it's a little bit cumbersome to work with, in the end it provides pretty significant protections for you guys, as well as keeping the public aware of what's going on. Okay, so unless anybody has any questions that you've had after your training about OPMA, I'm just gonna skip right over the rest of it. Okay, the next one is on public hearings. And I'm pretty impressed with especially the two new additions to our six-member council and how quickly you're up to speed. We may not really need to go into this one either. And so I'd have a specific question for you, Jared. Do you feel comfortable in overseeing the public hearings?
Yeah, I've read through the book several times. I mean, you never feel comfortable, right? Because I understand, and you know, I went to the training, talked to Dave Church, went through all of that. The biggest thing with public hearings, you know, is making sure that we have the adequate notice, and also making sure that it is a platform for the public to speak and not the council to address. So the organization of that is critical to me to make sure. One of the things we've really tried to do is be a little more formal in those to make sure that, one, it doesn't get out of hand with this side bantering against this side. People come up, you know, addressing the council one at a time, doing those types of things. I feel pretty comfortable. I mean, I understand the process. I don't know how comfortable you ever feel with trying to control the crowd.
The wrong word.
Yeah, but
you've already touched on the highlights of what I wanted to say. For the notice requirements, the staff does a good job trying to make sure that everything's covered on that. Once you're here, the main point that I wanted to make, or the main thing I wanted to point out for you, is that it is the public's opportunity to be heard, and a lot of times the best way to avoid contention between the council and the public is to just have the council not responding. Because if you get in a back and forth is when you leave control. If the council is listening, not speaking during the public hearing, then I think it's a lot easier for you to keep control of the
Dave Church mentioned that. He says that the mayor, ultimately, the last sentence, and as I was reading through that, says if it goes well, the mayor's, you know, it's his fault, and if it goes bad, it's his fault. So and that's one of those things that I've, you know, and we've had some discussion with the council about trying to keep things in a little formal. Dave and I have had that discussion also with, you know, just making it sure that it is just a listening opportunity for us and for them to, you know, we don't want to get into trying to address their concern immediately without, you know, hearing, and we just sit and listen. And so, yeah, I hope to achieve that.
Well, good luck. And
You can do it.
Yeah.
That wasn't a real positive
No, I think
emphasis there.
I think you'll do fine. I mean, there's times that there just isn't a whole lot that you can do.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would add.
That's what this is for.
Yeah. And you, I think it's probably what you meant when you talked about being more formal and how people are coming up. But the better job you do of kind of laying out the rules before the hearing starts, and then making sure that they're pretty strictly followed,
Yeah.
it will help you as well.
Right. And one of the, we have a habit, or it's just been customary, that we just speak from our seat and just go back and forth. And it's been a hard thing to change. And so making people, and you know, I'll tell you who does a really good job, and maybe you've talked to them about this and helped them along with this, is Duchesne County. I've been to several of their public hearings, and that's how I hope to pattern ours. Same way, you know, one person at a time speaks. We let the people that are for maybe the decision speak first. Anybody that says what you are thinking, don't come up and say the same thing. And then we let those that maybe have a contrary view come up, and then maybe somebody, you know, has a for view to address maybe the contrary view, and do that a few times to make sure that everybody feels like they've been heard, and then we can make a decision. And that seems like the pattern that I want to follow, and hopefully, I don't know if that's what you'd recommend, but that's
It
what I've
is
seen.
what I would recommend, and it has worked well for the county for the 12 years years now that I've been there. And you can, depending on what the topic is, sometimes it's helpful to have a time limitation too, and so they kind of have to get to the point. But then if they are either getting off track or just wanting to continue to say the same thing over and over, or even sometimes you could have hearings where they're just coming in and wanting to rail on you guys, and if you've got that time limitation, at least they can only do it for that long, and you can probably stand.
And that's where we really have to hold our tongues. And that's where the
JR's been doing a great job in moving the agenda, and I think we're in good shape in that direction.
Yeah, I don't have any concerns, and the main reason I was bringing that one up is just wanting to see if there's any questions that I could answer or advise. But when you were telling me what your plans are, you really hit on all of the highlights of what I was going to go over.
The only thing, the only question is, and I've contemplated it, is maybe a public hearing or something. And I don't think anything can ever get out of hand, but if we had maybe an officer or something where, because there is a way to eliminate somebody from the meeting if they get too out of hand, with a vote of the council and things like that. Yeah, 2/3 vote of the council, and so, but trying to get them to leave may be an issue, and I don't think we've ever had that.
I've seen that on YouTube.
Yeah.
Take you still just hanging down one of
But it may be something we keep in the back of our mind, just to have an
Is it heavy
officer
drink?
present at a public hearing just for that purpose. I highly doubt we ever need to use that.
I think
I didn't mean to
that
take
you'll
that.
have a pretty good idea in advance if you're going to need one.
Okay. Yeah.
My feeling is that you don't necessarily always need to have one here, or
True.
even always one on
If it's a very controversial,
Yeah,
issue,
you'll
then
know
possibly.
going into it if it's something that you're likely to have that kind of an issue, and then you can make arrangements to have an emergency.
yeah. Maybe a zone change or something like that probably wouldn't warrant that. Yeah, so, okay, no, that's good. And I appreciate that input.
Okay. The last thing I had on my list, and I don't think it's something we really need to go over now in advance because it's fact specific and it's something that we'll talk about as issues arise. That liability is the last one, and we'll talk about that as it relates to the cases that I need to talk to you about in closed session tonight. But sometimes potential liability may be something that you're wanting to consider before you make a decision. And that's something that you're always welcome to call me on. I can talk to you individually about just about anything you want. And just as long as there's not a quorum, that is the case. When there is a quorum, the open meeting rules apply. And if it was something that fit within the limited parameters for a closed session, we might be doing it there. If it didn't, then we shouldn't be talking about it with a group of you. Okay, did you have any questions on anything we've gone over, or is there anything that you would like me to cover more in depth at a future meeting?
I might have some ideas for you, but I'll send them to you over email. I don't have any on my mind right now, but I'm sure that I'm always thinking of new questions, so.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to come anytime you guys want me to. Like we already talked about, it doesn't increase your costs, so don't hesitate to use that.
Great.
All right.
Cool.
Okay, so that's all I have, but I would ask that we have a closed session tonight so I can talk to you about pending and imminent litigation.
Normally, we like to hold those at the end of the meeting, but
We're close to that,
Do you-
aren't we?
would you feel uncomfortable, Hal, if we went into closed session at this point?
It's time for me to go home, it's past my bedtime.
Okay. Normally, do we have anything?
We could finish a couple of those.
Should we go ahead and do
I
that
have no
real fast?
problem waiting. I
Okay.
just want-
And then
If
we
you don't
won't
mind,
have to
I'd like
do
to
it
do that. And
afterwards.
what we probably should have done, Grant, is you got those out of the way, and then you could have come and then you could still stand and be there. But, all right, we'll get to it. So purchase orders. Has everyone had a chance to look over the purchase orders? Okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve those.
I'll make that motion.
Second it.
Councilman White and Councilman Labrum, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Reports from standing committees. Do we have anything to report, Dave? Councilman Labor?
Not any other, we've been meeting more on the Johnson Water, and our meeting for parks got postponed for 2 weeks, so we don't have that one.
I don't have anything.
I don't have anything.
Just speaking quickly on the Johnson Water, I went with Ryan Claiborne, met with Johnson Water today. We visited about the things that we had discussed, the structure of, compensation in their area, those types of things. Two main things that I think are going to be difficult for us. They won't be difficult. It'll be the things that we'll have to compromise and negotiate most is obviously instead of changing the actual boundary and asking them to change the boundary, we'll make a service agreement boundary. And everything that falls within that service agreement boundary, there's two things on the table for negotiations. One, where that lies, whether it's Pole Line Road or whether it's pushed up a little bit. We visited with them today. I don't know how comfortable they felt with it being at Pole Line in some areas, particularly from the Highway 40 to State Street, because they feel like that is some opportunity for them that they could capture with the line that they have there. But I'm still hoping that we can get it to the Pole Line Road. I'll meet with them on Thursday with their...
Who was representing them today?
We had Jim Smart, Dixon was there, and we had Dallas, of course. Dusty was going to be there, but he couldn't make it. And anyway, but it went very well.
Good.
It was very well received. Nobody wants to give away in their hand, obviously, but I could tell that at least some of the things that we were discussing were somewhat favorable to them, or they seemed agreeable to, even though they wouldn't come right out and say that. So what we'll have to think about as a council is, are we willing to move that line around a little bit, that service agreement line? And then the other thing that was really important to them, and I feel like will be the next hurdle to overcome, is who has control to issue connections in that service agreement area. And one of the things I mentioned to them, and I tried to, we discussed it, and I think we all came to the same conclusion that if an entity came to us to provide that service in that area, they're wanting us to forward that request on to them, and then they can have the first right of refusal, and then it goes back to us. And I told them, if we could come to an agreement where, if we had jurisdiction, call it, in that area to where we could issue the connection, I just told them I feel like every time a connection came, it would be another point of contention. Yeah. That we would be haggling over that connection of who's supposed to do it and who's not supposed to do it, or who has the water that can and can't. So my feeling is that we move forward with the hope that we will have complete jurisdiction in that area to issue connections as they come. And ultimately, we all decided and could agree that for the customer, that's the very best thing that could happen.
Far and away.
So that's where we're at with that.
To me, that's a big part of the reason why we're willing to compensate them for all of the connections in that area is for future. We don't have to worry about arguing over that.
And we do have pressures. We have a robust system in that area, and they have their pipelines and things like that too. So that's one of those things, that we'll have to negotiate. But I think we can do it. Yeah. Thursday, I'll go, and I'll get the feeling of the rest of them, and then I'll bring that back to the council as well. But we're really moving forward. So just an update on that. I just wanted to let everybody know kind of how our meeting went. And it's looking optimistic, and everybody's working well together at this point. So that's all I have.
Nothing new tonight?
All right. We're not going to worry about the review of city code, I'm guessing. Do you have anything for us really quickly, Ryan?
Just a few quick ones. You might be interested. Actually, we opened up the valve there. We've worked on a few things, and We agreed to 1,200 gallons a minute, what the contract was, and we were providing that, so we've been providing that for most of the day today. We started at 10 o'clock Monday and have kind of been able to test through the last couple of days. We'll shut it back off we'll shut it back off tomorrow, probably about 10 o'clock, somewhere in that that morning time period. So it's working well. We haven't really got a lot of others that have complained about it, so I think it flows well. We've been seeing that.
That's great.
So we're in good position to be able to provide the water that is desired from that side. A few other items, we've talked about some of the legislation. A few different legislative pieces of agenda have come up. One of those that seems to, I don't know whether it continues to have traction, is affordable housing. There is a bill that would require a take from cities and counties of a certain amount to pay for the homeless shelters in Salt Lake. So they'll take from the rural areas, reallocate and redistribute the money from the poor rural areas and take it into Salt Lake and pay for low-income housing and homeless shelters. And so that is a bill. It has passed the House, so the House has voted on and approved it. The Senate committee has approved it, so it's out to the full Senate for approval. At this point, that would, it looks like it would take, first of all, it would take $1 per resident of the city, and then only half of them will pay it because the large cities are out. Then you have to, if you have over the
large cities are out. They're not included in that
because they'll have the shelter. If you have a shelter, you don't have to pay it.
Which bill is that again? It's House Bill
Anyway,
well,
what is it?
464, is that?
420. No, it was.
Anyway, I included it. I'd have to get that for you. But at this point, those that have ones that are large beds. So if it's a smaller city and has over 50 beds, so Vernal has 25 beds. They have a homeless shelter, 25 beds. They're not going to be able to count that because they don't have 50 or more. And so they'll have to pay. It's projected they'll have to pay. The other piece is those that don't pay. So the state population is about 3.3 million, and that is what they're asking to get. So any city that doesn't have to pay, then they come back and reallocate over those that do pay. So you first pay $1, and then you take in the reallocation. So at that point, they're going to get their 3.3 million, and if they exempt out some of the larger cities, that's going to raise the rest of it quite a bit. I have asked the...
is this an annual recurring thing?
Yeah, it'll be annual. It'll be recurring every year. I have asked our housing authority to kind of provide me a list of the housing stock that we'd have that would fit under that. And then I'm looking for the average of where the state, whether they're posting the averages so that we can determine whether we're over the 50% average or below the 50% average on providing. Because if we're above it and we're providing enough, then at that point we'd fall off and somebody else will have to cover our residents. I don't think we are. We have low-income housing in that, but I don't think we have enough that will fall out above the 50% mark. So at that point, it would take money from us to give to Salt Lake. Is what projection is.
It's pretty rare.
So anyway,
I mean, other than our oil minerals and that usually rural Utah's getting it from the big cities.
Yeah.
and they'll take it because the tax commission collects the sales tax. They'll just take it from the sales tax, and they'll take it before it ever gets to us.
Interesting.
So that's one of those to keep on your radar. Anything if you have chances to visit with our senator, take your opportunity. I'd encourage you to do that. Airport operator conference next week, so I'll be gone almost all of it next week, off to conferences. So if you need anything, let me know. I'll have my email. But kind of where we're at, briefly. So anyway, if you have other questions of what we're doing, just get with me. I'm happy to do that.
One thing on the House bill is just something that came to my attention that somebody that's concerned in my community. House Bill 422, I believe, is what it is. I just thought of that when you brought that up, but it has to do with propane or natural gas utility into rural areas, and that the state is looking at funding some of that will cost. So, anyway, you might want to look at that a little bit.
I'll look into that.
So, anything else? If not, Hal, thanks for sticking it out with us. And I'd entertain a motion to go into closed session for litigation.
So move.
I'll second that.
We have 3 moved in 1 second.
Give me the name.
Councilman Waite and Councilman Baird second. All in favor?
Aye.